It's the season of giving, and what better thing to talk about than socialism, a system whose goal is to give everyone the opportunity to be their best selves. Now you might say socialism is a joke and all it does is make everyone the same. Everyone lives in the same house, everyone is equally poor, everyone will be forced to eat panettone when they get back home on Christmas Eve from the labor camps. But I'd say to you, you've got it totally wrong. Because socialism isn't about forcing people to live with imposed restrictions on their daily habits or making you work a shit job that you dread going to every day for the simple sake of maintaining a place to live and having something to eat.
That actually sounds like capitalism.
My gift to you this holiday season is to present you the reality of what socialism is and what it isn't, by debunking some myths.
Socialism isn't democratic.
Let's start with this myth because it actually points to two myths. That one, capitalism is democratic, and two, socialism isn't. But let's define democracy first. Democracy is a system of governing or making decisions where things are decided upon by the vote of a majority of those involved. Under capitalism, where do we see democracy in our daily lives? If your answer is elections, then you just won $1,000, because you're right. What? Oh, we don't have $1,000. In most capitalist societies around the world, people experience democracy every 4 to 6 years when they pick a new head of state, or maybe if they're lucky enough to be in a union. But largely their experience is voting to hand over power to someone else they elect, who more often than not doesn't have their interest in mind.
Yeah, but what about socialism?
Socialism's intention is to take democracy and apply it to every facet of people's lives, not just voting for a representative and forgetting about them till the next election, but also voting to recall them when they steer away from the intended goals of those who voted them in. Socialism means democracy in the workplace, in schools, in our communities, so that people don't starve because they can't afford to eat, so that they don't die simply because they didn't have access to health insurance. It means people participating in their society at every level rather than being passive participants. Socialism means workers' democracy.
Socialism, one word, because people are inherently greedy.
Socialism? What's that?
And stupid.
Under capitalism, people compete for housing, food, jobs, healthcare, good schools, and the rest. We basically have been indoctrinated into thinking that this is just how people are, how things are. That people always fight each other for personal gain, or that the poor are poor because they choose to be. But we fight each other because capitalists have hoarded access to all these things. There is no reason for it to be that way other than they want to make a profit. For example, the US ruling class continued to use racism to justify legal segregation after slavery was over, because it was in their interest to maintain the second-class status African Americans were subjected to instead of sharing the wealth. God forbid working-class poor whites and blacks realize they have a common enemy. And yet it was that solidarity, in the form of a mass movement, that ended Jim Crow legal segregation.
Yeah, but they're stupid.
Well, the fact that we're an exploited class isn't obvious to people. It's like a hidden oppression. What happens when workers go on strike against an employer is that they begin to see themselves as an exploited group of people. In that fight, issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. arise, forcing workers to debate out issues beyond the initial demand for more money. A racist white worker in a strike can learn to break down their backward ideas while fighting side by side with people of color for better working conditions. Look, no one is born a radical or a socialist. It's in a struggle for justice that they become conscious, and it's the role of socialists to make them socialists in the process.
Come on, socialism only works on paper.
It also works on an iPad.
Aside from the great abundance capitalism has produced, what else has it accomplished? Massive inequality and environmental destruction. Like Fidel Castro once said, people speak of the failure of socialism, but where's capitalism's success in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America? Most of the countries on these three continents live under the economic boot of the United States and Europe. Here we find the highest concentrations of social inequality, poverty, poor infrastructure, and violence against women. If that's not an indictment of capitalism's supposed success, then psh. However, as a consequence, the most intense fights against the system and some of the biggest movements for socialism historically can be found there.
That commission only works until you run out of other people's money.
The right loves this argument, but capitalism produces an excess of waste. A third of food produced globally goes to waste every year. A democratically planned socialist economy allows for the proper allocation of resources and also a more just and ethical way of producing. Socialists aim to democratize how things are produced amongst workers and end the rule of the bosses by reclaiming the vast wealth the ruling class stole through their theft and exploitation. The early years of the Russian Revolution give us a glimpse of what the only workers' democracy ever looked like in practice. Vast democratization through workers' councils, legal abortions and sex changes, decriminalized homosexuality, state-run childcare, new forms of education, women given the right to vote, and many, many other revolutionary gains that were championed by and granted to the Russian working class. Socialism can work in reality when its ability to develop isn't crushed by the greedy few.
Socialism has murdered millions of people.
Come on! The two world wars fought in the 20th century alone dispel this ridiculous myth. Nearly 100 million people died because of the imperial power play by capitalist countries. Yes, the Soviets were involved and made their own power plays, but they suffered the greatest casualties of World War II, with over 20 million deaths in their fight to defeat the Nazis.
Yeah, but the Nazis were socialists.
The Nazis, or National Socialists as right-wingers like to remind us, were fascists, an ideology completely opposed to the ideas of socialism. The Nazis in fact murdered thousands of socialists in order to pave way for their hegemony and domination.
Socialism means everybody's poor.
This myth is interesting because the right claims everyone is poor under socialism, and I've already explained how that's not the case nor the aim of socialism. But there are sections of the socialist left that believe being a socialist means you should live like poor people.
Yeah, I see you with your iPhone, your big screen TV, your Nikes, and your 3-bedroom house, you bourgeois liberal.
You know how many times I've been called bougie? Having nice things isn't exclusive to the rich. Working class people deserve a lobster or steak dinner too. We have a right to have an iPhone and the rest of it, because those are the fruits of our class's labor. And our struggle for emancipation isn't about lowering the bar, it's about demanding the very best for each other. These socialist types conflate fighting against personal private property with the actual struggle against capitalist ownership of private property, that is, the means of production, the land, water, tools, and labor necessary to produce for our subsistence.
Bougie.
So those are some of the basic myths about socialism that I've encountered with everyday people. And I think dispelling those lays the foundation for a greater, more complex discussion about socialism. Because I didn't even touch upon Venezuela or Cuba or China. Those contemporary socialist experiments merit their own videos about their successes, failures, and limitations. 'Tis the season to get organized. With the rise of the right nearly all over the globe, the importance of the fight for workers' power, for socialism, is of the utmost importance.